Shalom. Here we are in the month of Kislev, the midst of the month of Kislev, the festival of Chanukah, and Kislev is known as the month of dreams. The Torah portions that deal with dreaming are all read during this month, and that leads us to this week's Torah portion, Parshat Miketz. We are right smack in the middle of the saga of Yosef and his brothers, and we'll be reading this week of Yosef's meteoric rise to power and his first confrontation with his brothers. Yosef is the master of dreams. Yosef got into the situation that he's in the first place, stuck in Egypt because of his initial dream, sharing his dream with his brothers, and now also the interpretation of the dreams of others was the tool through which Yosef's original dream of power and glory began to become fulfilled. Now, in chapter 42 of this week's Torah portion, we read of Yosef's initial confrontation with his brothers. Now, Joseph, he was the viceroy over the land. He was the provider to all the people of the land. Joseph's brothers came and they bowed to him, faces to the ground. This is already the fulfillment somewhat of that initial dream. Joseph saw his brothers and he recognized them, but he acted like a stranger toward them and spoke with them harshly. Why? Yosef was not gloating or anticipating with great joy the fulfillment of this dream for personal reasons. Yosef knew very well, as the tzaddik, as the instrument for Hashem's will to be fulfilled in this world, Yosef knew that there was so much riding on him. Yosef knew that the very redemption at that time and in the future for all of Israel and indeed for all of humanity was totally dependent upon him. And so Yosef had to act in a certain way. He had to enact and begin a process that would lead to a rectification, to a clarification, first and foremost, of the hearts and minds of his brothers. So Yosef's behavior here was indicative of his greatness. He had to see to it that this dream indeed is fulfilled so that his brothers would be able to recognize him and his brothers would be able to understand what it is exactly that he's trying to accomplish for Hashem in this world. The whole enigma of Yosef in prison, Yosef in Egypt, Yosef rising to power, it's all totally beyond us. There's another aspect of the confluence of this month of Kislev, the month of dreams, and the month of Hanukkah. The confluence of Kislev and these Torah portions, the portions of Joseph, because these portions, the portions of Yosef, always fall out in close proximity with Hanukkah. And much ink has been spilled over trying to plumb to the depths of this secret. What is the connection between Yosef and Hanukkah? Much has been written about this. There's all sorts of ideas that have been expressed that show different kind of connections between the nature, the character of Yosef and his story, and the theme of Hanukkah. And Yosef's presence now in our lives is felt so strongly in these Torah portions, his enigma, and what he stands for, this idea of this flawless righteousness in the midst of a pagan world. It seems to smack very, very closely of some sort of Hanukkah theme, but the truth is, what do they have in common? What is their relationship? This is such an important point, and maybe the idea is far simpler than we would expect. Maybe the common denominator between Yosef and Hanukkah exists on the plainest level of all. And it's well known that Hanukkah is such a special time. It's immensely popular. It is something that, it's a time that has a tremendous attraction and pull to the people of Israel, wherever they are and whatever their station is. There's something about the observance of Hanukkah that just rings true in the collective consciousness and in the depths of the of the primordial collective heart of Israel. There's something about Hanukkah that is so real, accessible, comforting, important to them. Hanukkah, the miracle of the oil, the motif of the light that oil represents, the light of the menorah, of the Shekhinah, shining forth from the Holy Temple, the light of the original days of creation, the miracle of the military victory of the Chashmonaim. All these are aspects of Hanukkah, but what really is the core idea linking all of these principles? What is Hanukkah really all about? What is the core, one word, one thought, principle, foundation upon which the entire phenomena rests? Maybe then, if we understood that, we would understand both the tremendous pull, power that Hanukkah has for this generation, as well as the connection that these special days have to do with Yosef HaTzadik, the righteous Yosef. Now, the Greeks who came and invaded the land of Israel, they enacted terrible decrees against Israel, decrees against their very spiritual essence, against the very identity of who the Jews are, decrees against their observances, against studying Torah, against keeping Shabbat and Rosh Chodesh, against keeping circumcision, all the elements of Jewish life that sanctify this banal existence and that serve to elevate this world into a bridge that brings the divine light into the world. These are all the aspects that the Greeks chose to attempt to destroy. And furthermore, our sages emphasize to us that the Greeks, who are themselves, in this context, the exile is called of Greece, when they, during this historical period when they came and defiled the temple, it's called darkness. The Greeks tried to darken the eyes of Israel by driving a wedge between Israel and the Torah. The main element of the Greek persecution against Israel was a purposeful, calculated attack on faith. Yes, on the faith of the Jews. This was not a physical threat of annihilation, though there was a great deal of physical loss, deprivation, torture, suffering, but that wasn't the point of the Greek onslaught. Its goal was to darken the eyes of Israel, was to separate them from the Torah by forcing them to first question their faith and ultimately to abandon their faith. And famously, the Midrash Rabbah tells us that the Greeks forced Israel to write on the horn of an ox the statement, "We have no portion in the God of Israel." This was some sort of yellow star. This was some sort of self-deprecating tweet or Facebook posting that the Jews were forced to advertise, to memorize, to shout out, to carry around on their person this statement, "We have no portion in the God of Israel." They were forced to say with their heads hanging low. They were forced to try to convince themselves to question their own faith. And instead of believing in the omniscience and omnipresence of the God of Israel and his direct interaction and providence in their everyday lives, the Greeks forced them to think like a Greek. Everything is just as it is. Everything is just as it seems, skin deep. Beyond here lies nothing. There is no deeper meaning. Everything is just physical and whatever you can prove. And this physical reality, that's such a heinous, insidious, invidious idea, because it means that everything is about what we can accomplish ourselves, our own power. It's the power of the animal. It's the power of might makes right. And it disguises itself as arts and culture and science and all sorts of noble pursuits that are devoid totally of the presence of God. So this was their essential goal. It was an attack against faith. And that very faith is the entire essence, life force of Yosef, of who he was. Yosef stands for faith. Yosef is faith. He is like a piece of living faith. And everything that the Greeks tried to foist upon Israel, all of the onslaught that the Greeks came with all of their might, all of their gross physicality, representing that whole godless world, they came against Israel, tried to denude them of their faith. This is called darkness. And this is so parallel to Yosef in that foreign world, in that pagan world, in prison in that world, totally alone, totally outnumbered, totally isolated, totally cut off and alienated from his own family, but yet so knowing that Hashem's promises would come true, that his promises for Israel and for the world would come true through him, and that he had to go through exactly what he had to go through. This is the very explanation itself of why, because this is another question that is very compelling and that occupies a great many of the commentators. Why did Yosef not attempt to contact his father all of those years? It's one thing when he was in prison, but certainly when he rose to power, he had the capacity to notify his father and let him know that he was safe and that he was alive and to come for him. And Yosef knew very well that everything that was happening to him was for a purpose, and that if Yaakov did not know, he was not to know until the proper time, and that he had to go through everything that he had to go through. And there is a midah, an attribute, a character trait of a person in this world knowing that everything that Hashem does and has allowed to happen to us and that we are involved in is for the best. And that midah, that headspace, is the exact opposite of the Greek Esavian perspective of a chaotic, outwardly appearingly orderly, but a chaotic life, which is basically absolute abandonment to the forces that control things in a haphazard way. Deuteronomy 32:9 in the song states, "For Hashem's portion is his people. Jacob is the measure of his inheritance." Yaakov chevel nachalato, Hashem's portion is his people. That verse is so important, and that is the verse that is actually identified with the character of Yosef, the continuation of Yaakov, because the Greeks, their whole thing was this mass advertising campaign. It was in all the social media, and it was on all the billboards, and it was carried around and tattooed on and written by and force marched the Jews this statement: we have no portion in the God of Israel. They were forced to repeat this as a mantra and write it down and communicate it, because they were supposed to memorize it and they were supposed to internalize it. But you see, they refused. Under the bold leadership of the Kohanim, the Chashmonayim, who refused to be disconnected from the God of Israel, who never forgot that verse in Deuteronomy. No, Hashem is the portion. Hashem's portion is his people. You can't convince us that we have no portion in the God of Jacob. And the pull, the magnificent attraction of Chanukah for Jews worldwide, and for all those who treasure the God of Israel, the attraction is that the renewal of our faith, the shining of this light into the darkness that is this world, is a challenge that presents itself in every generation. We have the ability to restore and renew and reinstate that Hashem, His portion is His people. Yes, we do have a portion in the God of Yaakov. And there are still those forces today that make us wonder and afraid and vulnerable and try to convince us that we have no portion and that all that there is this. And that is absolutely a false vision, a vision of reality, because the truest vision of reality is the light that lights up the darkness. So we read in Psalms 139, "Would I say, surely darkness will shadow me, then the night would become as light around me. Even darkness obscures not from you, and night shines like the day. Darkness and light are the same." This is the purpose of Jewish existence. And this is the whole apparatus of what happens on Chanukah. When that defiling spirits that defiled the oil, that desecrated the temple, that took over the land, and that tried to grab us bodily and shake us into another world of fear and convince us that we have no portion of the God of Israel. When that force raises its head again, we light up the darkness. So that Isaiah 9, also a verse that can be applied so beautifully to Hanukkah, the first verse of Isaiah 9, states, "The people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelled in the land of the shadow of death, light has shone over them." This is the whole purpose of the festival of Hanukkah, and it's so palpable, and it's so accessible, and the feeling is so real because it is true Jewish reality. And no wonder Yosef, his presence, the stamp of his character, is an inexorable accompaniment, companion, volume to Hanukkah every year, because Yosef is the embodiment of this faith, of the power of that faith to go the distance in this world of falsehood and darkness, and to realize that Hashem has His hand on us, and that everything leads us back to Him, and that everything will play itself out according to that plan, but that we have to do our part. And Yosef, truly, that figure of magnificent nobility, because of his unshakable faith and because of his righteousness and his commitment, Yosef is truly the hero for our time, just as Hanukkah is the festival for every generation, and certainly everything that Hanukkah represents, our ability to shine that light of faith in this dark world. Hanukkah is really the festival for our time.